Is everything fine? Okay. Fine. Okay. The thing is, lie detector should be used in legal process in court. Okay. Now, why do you want to use it? You know, uh, people now accuses false on others. So what happens? Innocent people get punishment. There is a federal saying that there is no problem if 100 people, 100 criminals go unpunished, but there should be no innocent get punishment or jailed. So if we use lie detector, what happens? We can judge people, we can judge the witnesses, we can uh, just use lie detectors or polygraph in them and know if they are lying or not. So if we use this, what will happen? Firstly, the time and the legal procedure will be shortened. How? As lie detectors um, give instant result. So if anyone uh, files any case in the court, or if anyone give any false statement against someone who is accused, I will just literally get afraid. So if we get just use just lie detector, we'll be rid of this situation. Now, lie detectors are uh, its lie detector are currently being used in almost 50 countries in the world in the fields of correction, criminal investigation, intelligence or counterintelligence, civil matters. In US, all federal law enforcement agencies either employ their own polygraph or use the services of examiners employed in other agencies. Examiners and quality control program exist in the FBI, US Central Service, US Army CID, Marine Corps CID, Air Force OSI, US Customs, US Marshals, and other figures. During 1996, in US, there were 12,000 polygraph tests done. In recent years, US Department of Defense used 95% crime investigations pertaining to crimes for while the maximum penalty is 15 years or more. It is also used for accounted for the army service army solving, which is in the rate of 64.7% felony cases compared with the national average of 19.5.
All right, so detecting deception by examining bodily changes is not something new. More than 4,000 years ago, the Chinese tried accused people in the presence of a doctor who would announce whether the accused was lying based upon his heartbeat. The Bedouins required suspected liars to lick a hot iron, and then a burned tongue would show that the accused was lying. And in England, people had to swallow a slice of bread and cheese. And if you weren't able to swallow it, then you were guilty. Now, humanity as a whole has been trying for thousands of years to determine absolutely when someone is lying. Now, the polygraph machine isn't nearly as speculative as the aforementioned test, but it still holds the same basic principle, that we can tell that someone is lying based upon how their body reacts. Now, in this first speech that I'll be doing, I'll be looking at the status quo. Why are we debating this today? Why is it currently a law that these polygraph tests can't be used in criminal court proceedings? What do we have to do? So the precedent for this debate that we're having today can be tracked back to 1923 in the case of Fry versus the United States, where a man who was accused of murder attempted to prove his innocence by subjecting a polygraph test. However, the court rejected his request and explained in their statement, quote, "Just when a scientific principle or discovery crosses the line between experimental and demonstrable stages is difficult to define. Somewhere in this twilight zone, the evidential force of the principle must be recognized, and while courts will go a long way in admitting expert testimony deduced from a well-recognized scientific principle or discovery, the thing from which the deduction is made must be sufficiently established to have gained general acceptance in the particular field in which it belongs." And this was further backed up in 1998 when the Supreme Court upheld a ban on the use of polygraph tests in military courts. The statement from Justice Thomas Clarence was, quote, "To this day, the scientific community remains extremely polarized about the reliability of polygraph techniques. There is simply no way to know in a particular case whether a polygraph examiner's conclusion is accurate." So just to finish up my speech, there are three things that the pro really has to prove in order to win this round. So the first one is he has to prove that there will be a positive change. Now, it doesn't have to be a huge change, doesn't have to be, a significant change. It just has to be a positive change, however little or big it is. The second thing he has to prove is that polygraph machines have improved, that they've improved from the time that these court rulings were made, that these statements were released, that these machines have improved and are more accurate than they once were. And my third and final burden upon the pro is that there has to be consensus among the scientific community that these things are reliable. These were the basis for the decisions in these legal court proceedings. They should be the basis for the decision that we're making today.
Okay, you talked about the polygraph. You talked about that how the polygraph test actually depends on how people's body react. You talked about 1923 reliability and accuracy. Okay, in 2003, the Central Bureau of CBI has stated that polygraph tests are on polygraph machines are 90% accurate. So what does that mean? That means they have improved uh, than the before. Okay, if you talked about to prove a positive change, polygraph test. Just a minute. In US, the acceptance of polygraph test in sex offender treatment programs while testing uh, convicted serial sex offenders while on parole or prohibition. Today, a very number of pedophiles on probation in the state of Oregon and Washington are currently under polygraph surveillance and maintain program as the part of the parole conditions. The success of the Jackson County Sex Offender Treatment Program in Oregon has been so great that the other states, including California, Texas, Florida, Massachusetts, Indiana, and Colorado, have adopted the use of the polygraph examination in the supervision. Okay, now you can tell. Can you tell me if there was no success and if the polygraph test is not reliable, then why the other states are adopting this technique? This, as far as I researched, polygraph is maximally uses in the US more than any other country. So if United States use this, then why can't the other? Okay, now just get out of the US. Talk about other countries. In developing countries like Bangladesh, India, or Pakistan, what is happening? The innocent are proven guilty. How? By the false statements. So, if we just use polygraph tests on the witness and the criminals, will they always survive? There are always some. There are always some. What can I say? Uh, uh, different benchmark, like the exceptions. There are always some exceptions, but which will
So starting off at the beginning of what you talked about, that 90% statistic rate. Now, that 90% statistic rate is actually from the American Polygraph Association. So it's actually in their best interest to give the best possible statistic, for that success rate. So if we're going to use those statistics, we probably should be using ones from more unbiased sources or just different organizations. But even if we're looking at that 90% success rate, you still have 10% of the time in these legal court proceedings that is wrong. And so you are going to have people being wrongly convicted at least 10% of the time if we use these machines. Now, that may be an improvement in other developing countries, but what we have to realize is we have to use stuff that is grounded in fact, that is grounded in precise scientific data, and this isn't trusted by the scientific community. You haven't provided any sources for that, any examples, and the fact of the matter is it's still extremely easy to beat. In fact, if you just go on Google and you type in how to beat a polygraph test, thousands of things will pop up. There's how-tos online, there's books, there's former polygraph examiners who can teach people how to beat the test. In 1994, psychologists at the University of Utah published a report that suggested that if you perform certain behaviors such as biting your tongue or counting backwards in your head by sevens during the exam, during the control questions, those results could be skewed. See, the fact of the matter is this is a great thing, and if it worked, it'd be fantastic, but it doesn't actually tell if someone is lying. The thing that a lie detector or a polygraph machine does is it detects what the body reacts, how the body reacts, and there's simply no evidence that any pattern of physiological reactions is unique to deception. The lie detection involves inferring deception through analysis of responses to questions. And one of the main problems is that there has not been a separation of the placebo effect from the actual relationship between deception and their physiological responses. A study done by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in 2003 found that almost a century of research in scientific psychology and physiology provides little basis for the expectations that polygraph tests could have extremely high accuracy. In fact, guilty people in notorious cases have passed polygraph tests, including Gary Ridgway, who was the Green River Killer, and the notorious Russian mole Aldrich Ames. On the flip side, innocent people have also failed the test, notably Bill Wergel, who was suspected of killing his wife in 1986 until DNA evidence exonerated him. The premise of a polygraph is that people will behave differently when they're lying. However, there are a multitude of reasons why your body changes.
Okay. Professor David Lycan from the University of Minnesota has written that judicious use of polygraph in the criminal investigation context not only can improve the efficiency of police work, but also serve as a bulwark to protect the innocents from false prosecution. In fact, I believe that the police use the polygraph too frequently. If used wisely, polygraph can easily facilitate police work. Okay. In the past 75 years, over 250 studies have been conducted on the accuracy of the polygraph. Testing since 1980, 10 separate studies based on 1,909 real cases showed that the accuracy rate of truthful subjects was 97%, and for deceptive subjects, it's 98%. There have been more published studies done on polygraph accuracy, validity and reliability than on handwriting analysis, which is routinely admitted into evidence on a daily basis. Okay, now you talked about the how polygraph machine works. Okay, if I am telling something wrong statement against somebody, or if I have done any crime, usually what happens when I am in court, I will be just literally I will be feared. You told about the that officer who passed the uh, editing polygraph test, and you talked about what happened in 1983 about the DNA test. But what happens? There are exceptions, as I told before. There are exceptions. But what happens if you do? If you are in the accusement, or if you are in the guilty box, what happens to you? You will just literally fear, no matter about how. In previous decades, polygraph tests are using on just 2 or 3 measurements, but now polygraph test includes almost everything. How active your brain is, your eye reaction of your eye, your sweaty skin, respiratory system, or heartbeat, pulse rate, just everything. So if 2 or 3 people just pass the polygraph test falsely, that doesn't mean the polygraph test hasn't any accuracy or reliability. It can be always, it can always it can be also trust, and it is always reliable. So that we should use polygraph test. I am not saying that we can't use polygraph test as there are witnesses, but beside witnesses we can use it.
Right. So, you touched on a couple different things, specifically talking about how the accused, that fear, and I completely agree with you. If you're being unjustly accused, there is that fear. However, there's also a fear for people who are undertaking a polygraph test. In fact, Al Garber, who's a former FBI agent, and a U.S. Marshal for the District of Minnesota, said that certain people fear the test because they don't believe in the polygraph and they're afraid that the polygraph will show something that's not true. And then he went on to say, usually when a suspect or witness declines testing, it's for darker reasons. If they say, I'm not taking a polygraph, naturally it makes you believe they must have something to hide. So there we have two things. First off, we see that there's a lot of people who are afraid of taking polygraph tests because they're afraid it will show something that simply isn't true. But then we also see the bias of a law enforcement officer and how these officers and people view people who refuse to take polygraph tests. It's immediately a suspicion of guilt. It's immediately a suspicion of they did something wrong. He said it's for darker reasons. The majority of people who don't want to take polygraph tests just don't want to take a polygraph test. You have that bias already in place among law enforcement, among juries, among judges. The fact of the matter is these polygraph machines are not scientifically accurate. They have not been accepted among the scientific community as accurate. The reason we're having this debate is because they are currently banned in military courts and they are very, very, very rarely accepted into regular United States courts, whatever that court system may be. In fact, what we're debating today is whether or not they should be allowed in the legal process, whether or not we should let them in. And so, looking at it, just taking a step back. So we want to have justice for all. We want to have the best possible outcome, and I think that's what you're arguing for as well. However, what we have to realize is that we cannot have justice if we're relying upon something that is unreliable. If the majority of our faith and our trust is based in something that is so speculative, that so many people distrust, then there's a problem. We have to be putting our faith in something that we can, truly believe, that we have 100% truth and 100% proof that it will work and it will have the best possible outcome. We don't have that with polygraph machines. If we had that with polygraph machines, then that's great. Then we should put those in place. However, as we saw, there hasn't been a ton of improvement on these machines. The scientific community does not approve of them. And, quite simply, they're extremely easy to beat and extremely easy to be wrong.
Okay, you just talked about let's just get away from the US and think about the other countries. In third world countries, the majority of the people doesn't trust on the court. You think about Pakistan, India, or Pakistan or India. So in Pakistan, majority of the people doesn't rely on the court. They don't assume that they will get their proper they don't think that they will get the proper guilty man punished by the court. So what is happening there? There are some problems such as corrupt police officers and the other things, and in some cases the judges are also corrupted. So if you just said, I am not telling that we must say set polygraph machines, but I am just saying that we should think about fitting polygraph machines in it. So how that will help that if the judge is if the judge, lawyer, and the police officer is 100% corrupted or 90% corrupted, and if we replace them with the polygraph testers, won't that be enough to them to don't give the what can I say wrong judgment? If we said there polygraph machines, I can say we can say that there will be more chances of getting proper judgment. So not being on the US, but being also thinking about thinking the polygraph machine by the globally, we can say that, right? And you told about the innocent people, the fear about fear of the innocent people for polygraph. Okay, if just polygraph machine, I know about the polygraph machine, I know how it works. I'm talking about myself. I know about the polygraph machine. If I have not done anything wrong, why will I fear? Just as like this. And when it will be used for a whole country, for all the course, people will usually know about it. Literally know about what polygraph machine is, how is it works, how will it help us. So their fear about the polygraph machine will gradually disappear. So there will be more chances of misjudgment, and that is how it will work for us. Okay.
So talking specifically, addressing the whole worldwide issue. So, first off, if a court is corrupt, then 99% of the time, those polygraph, machine, those tests are going to come out incorrectly because they're extremely easy to manufacture, a wrong setting if you wanted to mess with the machine. Specifically, we're talking about a legal court process, assuming that there is due process. In a corrupt court system, I don't think any one machine is going to fix a corrupt system. I don't think, having a polygraph machine would result in more people, not being unjustly punished. There's still going to be that corruption in the court. The judge is still the one making the sentencing decisions. The polygraph machine in itself doesn't make any decisions. The results from the polygraph machine are interpreted by humans. Humans are, flawed. We all have errors. We can read things incorrectly, but also people telling the truth oftentimes have different bodily reactions. There is no evidence whatsoever that there is a specific physiological response to lying, or that telling the truth has a specific physiological response. In fact, Melissa Littlefield, who's a researcher and associate professor in kinesiology and community health at the University of Illinois, found in an experiment that she conducted that a person's body can trigger similar test results when undergoing stressful truth-telling as when lying. And stressful truth-telling is essentially, confessing to something you don't really want to confess to, or admitting something that, you don't really want to admit. So stressful truth-telling can have almost the exact same test results as lying. So someone who is telling the truth when they don't want to can actually be seen as lying. And, also just, look at the creation of this machine. So the inventor of the machine, John Larso, he actually withdrew eventually his support of his own invention because he realized the flaws that were inside of it. So, looking at third world countries specifically, in these corrupt courts in developing countries, this machine isn't going to fix that problem. These corrupt, officials are still in power. This machine isn't going to be making those decisions specifically. But we still have not seen that, number one, there is, a true positive change in the legal court process where we're assuming that there is due process, not a corrupt system. We haven't truly seen how these machines have really improved, and we still haven't seen a consensus among the scientific community that these things are reliable. We have to see those things before we can side with the pro, and we have not seen either of them.
Okay. Polygraph machine was invented in 1921. After invention, as you said, the inventor was not really relying on it. But after 6 years of experiments and other things doing on it, the inventor itself told that it will be a machine which will help to people detecting the lies a lot. As because it was invented in 1921 and it is now 2007. there's a lots of year and lots of other students, other labs, other universities, or other government agencies has worked on the machine. So now we can say that as there are so many researches and so many other things done on this kind of polygraph test, it is now more reliable than the previous one. Okay, you said that it will not just eradicate corruption. As people, as I was talking, the judge or the lawyer or the policeman is if corrupted, what will happen? So now if the third world countries are in corruption, it will just help to eradicate corruption gradually. How? That is that is that will help by the test. As far I got by your speech, you told that you was trying to say that the corruption countries will also change the test results. As I yeah, because the analysis of the machines will there is chance to be them to be corrupted. So if we just make a national law in our parliament that polygraph tests should be there, what will happen? This will just shake the roots. People will start new beliefs that it helps. And you told that how people just bypass polygraph tests, how the innocents uh, get punishment or their statement are becoming false, or we can assume they are false. But if we just use the polygraph machine and use just perfect analyst on it, use research on it, and implement this on court, it will be beneficial.
All right, so my last speech, just touching specifically on that again, the corruption within these court systems. So we have to realize that this machine is examining human reactions, human bodily reactions. It is not determining whether or not you are lying. That is the human who is examining the reactions job. So with that corruption within a court system, we still don't have the assurance that that corruption is going to go away, because there is still that human element that cannot be, foreseen. We cannot predict. That corruption isn't just going to go away because of the implementation of a specific device that measures bodily reactions to questions. There is no evidence that any pattern of physiological reactions is unique to deception. I've said that a couple times in this round. I'd just like to reiterate in my last speech. There is no evidence that bodily reactions directly correspond to lying or truthfulness. In fact, excuse me, Deanne Katz, who is a research fellow at the Privacy and Technology Project, said there's also less devious and interesting ways to fool a polygraph test. If you're nervous while the questions are being asked, the results will likely be inconclusive. It turns out the symptoms of nervousness or anxiety are the same symptoms people exhibit when lying. So we have to realize, number one, these tests aren't always accurate to begin with. Number two, they're extremely easy to be tampered with. And number three, it is extremely easy to accidentally fail a polygraph machine. If you're nervous, if you're anxious, if you're scared, if you think the machine won't work, then you probably are going to fail it, or you're going to fail a couple of different questions. Going back to what Al Garber, the former FBI agent, said, looking at that, the assumption of guilt. He said when people refuse these tests, it's often for darker reasons. So we already have this assumption from law enforcement that if you don't take it, you are essentially guilty. It's the same in a court setting. These people believe the same thing. There is still that bias of if you don't want to take it, you are guilty. The fact of the matter is, these tests do not work. Madeline Barron, who has a BA in philosophy and MA in journalism and is an investigative journalist, said, despite the continued employment of polygraph testing by law enforcement, these tests don't reliably or consistently work. They are considered by many in the scientific and legal communities as only marginally more accurate than coin flips. Coin flips Are we seriously considering implementing a machine into our legal system that is marginally more accurate than a coin flip? We still don't have the assurance that this is going to be accurate. We don't have the backing of the scientific community, and we have no